Well, I've managed to get my father's 72-year-old American Flyer train running once again, and in this video we're going to take a look at what I did to get it running. Okay, so I had a video previously on this old American Flyer set from 1951 that I got out and it just wasn't running very well. And so I went ahead and did a number of things to help improve its performance. So essentially what I did was I changed out the motor brushes and springs. I replaced all of the wiring and I replaced the E-unit. It's a Dali Electronics Universal E-unit. And I had replaced the original unit in the tender some years ago with one of these Dali units. And the combination of everything did get everything running pretty well. Now the problem I had was that somehow I lost some of the screws. Unfortunately, the ones I lost were the ones that actually attached to the drive wheels. And so this is causing it to have a weird hitch when it's running because the screws I have on one side are not the original ones. And as a result, because they're looser, it kind of just has a weird hitch. So I'll get those replaced eventually, but everything else for the most part is working a lot better. So anyway, let's go through the steps I took to complete this quasi-restoration. There's still more work to do in terms of its appearance and again, replacing some screws and other things, but at least to this point, here is what I did. So I started by taking everything apart, trying to pull everything out so I could get to the wiring, replace that pretty easily. And so once I had everything fully disassembled, I worked on replacing the wiring between the plug that connects to the actual locomotive itself and then runs the wires to the tender. I worked on replacing those wires to that plug. And then I worked on replacing all the wires within the locomotive itself, going to the motor and the smoke unit and the headlight and that kind of thing. So once I had all that wiring redone, I ran them into the tender and I put a piece of heat shrink tubing around the bundle of wires so they wouldn't get frayed on the edge of the metal hole where they were going into the tender. At that point, it was a matter of connecting all of those wires to the wires on the plug for the electronic E-unit. And so I made all of those wire connections, and then the last thing to do was to connect all of the wires that needed to go to the electrical pickups on the truck of the tender. And one thing I changed from what I had before was I connected the wires from the smoke unit directly to the pickup points on the tender, so they weren't going through, so it wasn't drawing power through the E-unit or anything like that, and that would hopefully make that whole process a little bit more reliable and take away some of the current draw through the E-unit and through the wiring elsewhere in the locomotive. The new Dali E-unit fits perfectly in the tender area between the weight. But one thing I did this time, unlike last time, is I just went ahead and wrapped the whole thing in Kapton tape. So everything is covered with the Kapton tape. So there is no chance it's going to accidentally at some point contact the metal of the tender or the weight and cause a short circuit in that way. So just wanted to make sure that wasn't going to be an issue, at least during testing, especially when things are still maybe loose and moving around a little bit. And so I went ahead and did that. So at that point, it was a matter of getting everything put back together. I did have to make a couple last wire connections, and then it was a matter of trying to get the motor reassembled with the new brushes and the new springs, and then getting the wires for the power connected to the motor. And then it was simply a matter of reassembling all the pieces for the locomotive. And that's when I did find that I was missing two of the small screws. I have no idea where they went. I thought I had everything in the same container, but apparently a couple escaped somewhere along the way. And that obviously was a problem. So I assembled everything that I could without those missing screws. And so then before trying to figure out what to do about those missing screws, I went ahead and replaced the headlight in the locomotive as well. Now I couldn't get the old headlight off. It was soldered on. I just couldn't get everything taken apart without breaking anything. So I just went ahead and cut it off. And so I just soldered the wires to the new light bulb, and then pretty much just the light bulb is sitting there in the front of the locomotive. It's not in a bracket like the other one was. And it's pretty much just sitting there in front of where the headlight opening is. And that works fine, even though it's not lined up exactly perfectly. Enough light shines through to where it looks okay. So anyway, I pulled out my container of machine screws and I was able to find a couple that fit into the drive wheels. However, the screws in the drive wheels are special in that the thread diameter is not the same as the diameter of the part of the screw that actually fits through the drive rods on the drive wheels. And so as a result, there is a lot of extra play for those drive rods, and that causes it to have that weird hitch when it's running. So once I get the new screws ordered and I replace those, the overall motion of this locomotive should be dramatically smoother. And then the last thing to do before testing was to add some Labelle oil in different areas to make sure all the lubrication was restored. I had done this before I had taken everything apart here to try to replace these components, but the process of doing that probably removed some of the oil, so I went ahead and re-oiled things I had oiled previously. But anyway, once that was done, I put it on the test track and everything seemed to work okay. And then I went ahead and set up the old American Flyer track, gave it a good cleaning with some mineral spirits, and everything ran pretty well. So just a few last things to do functionally in terms of replacing screws and kind of seeing where things are at after that. And then I'll worry about whether or not I want to restore the paint or the finish of this locomotive at that point, and try to restore it to something that looks back to a new condition. But anyway, it's been a lot of fun to see this 72-year-old locomotive running once again, and running the best that it has in quite some time. I'll probably have another follow-up video at some point down the road once I do the final restoration, whatever that might end up being with this train set, whether or not I go ahead and repaint the locomotive to fix the areas that are a little bit rusty or the paint's missing. There's some details on the locomotive also missing that I'll probably try to replace, and so I'll have at least a short follow-up at some point when all of that work ends up being completed. But anyway, that's all for now, and thank you for joining me on this journey.